Hello everyone and welcome to Business Africa. I'm Ndea Yoka. In this edition, US Vice President Kamala Harris aimed to deepen and reframe the US relationship with Africa during a week-long trip to the continent. The Ugandan government expects economic growth to exceed 7% from 2025 onwards, thanks to the recent start of oil production in the Lake Albert region. And finally, in 2022, French-speaking African countries achieved the best economic growth performance in sub-Saharan Africa for the 9th consecutive year. Kamala Harris's trip to Ghana, Tanzania and Zambia has a special dimension, as it's the latest initiative to strengthen US-Africa ties. Can the US-Africa relationship really be redefined, as Harris indicated in Accra? More details follow. After the rift created by the administration of Donald Trump, US Vice President Kamala Harris has come to Africa to reaffirm the American wish to build a win-win partnership with the continent. President Joe Biden's deputy landed in Accra on Sunday at the start of a week-long trip to Africa, promising investments and, of course, aid.
I intend to do work that is focused on increasing investments here on the continent and facilitating economic growth and opportunity.
The United States wants to counter China and Russia, both of which have strong interests in Africa. Beijing has made its presence felt in recent years through infrastructure initiatives, loans, and the expansion of telecommunication networks. Ghana, for example, has struck a $2 billion deal with a Chinese company to develop roads and other projects in exchange for access to a key mineral needed for aluminium production. The war in Ukraine has reinforced the importance of Africa in international politics and, in parallel, intensified the geopolitical battles. At the recent US-Africa summit, Washington emphasized that the narrative needs to change. As part of efforts to expand investments in the region, the United States pledged $55 billion in December to the African continent, the land of opportunity. The following month, the US Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, also spoke of the massive economic potential that Africa represents because of its demographics. To find out what's at stake with Kamala Harris's visit to Africa, I'm joined by Paul Baker, CEO of International Economics Consulting. Welcome to Business Africa. Can the US relationship with Africa, until now based entirely on aid, really take a different turn, and why now and not before?
Yeah, I think, that's the aim of the administration, indeed. It's to move away from just aid, but also moving towards good governance and general global governance and also economic development and investment. So I think, these three areas, I think the US would like to play a bigger role with Africa.
The United States has been keen to separate her visit from its rivalry with China. Why is there a feeling that once again Africa is stuck in the middle of a chess game between the two?
Yeah, of course, the US has quite a strong interest in terms of counterbalancing maybe Chinese investment in, say, digital infrastructure and also just general infrastructure. Also, access to minerals now is becoming quite critical for many developed countries as well. And so I think there is that counterbalance that's trying to be created. But I think also America is also seeing the opportunities of the African market. There's several countries that are growing at very rapid rates in Africa. The AFCFTA, of course, is a signal that Africa is moving towards a new era in terms of trade and development. So I think the US would also like to take advantage of those particular opportunities as well.
Given the importance of Chinese investment in Africa, what does the US have to offer the continent?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that the US is offering is it's going to promote a seat at the G20, a permanent member of the G20 for the African Union, and I think that's something that's quite unique. They didn't, for example, offer this to ASEAN countries, nor to the Organization of American States. So I think, again, on the geopolitical level, that's quite significant for Africa to be there. They have the US has already made quite big commitments of $55 billion to the African continent over the next 3 years. And that's to specifically support the AU's Agenda 2063. So it's investing in areas that China is not always so present in, like human capital, agriculture, health systems, and security. And then, of course, there's the partnership that it's trying to create through trade and investment as well. So I think, the US has quite a lot still to offer Africa. And we also know that with some African countries, the relationship with China has soured. So the US also sees an opportunity, I think, in filling that gap.
At the US-Africa Summit, Washington signed agreements with the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. How is it beneficial for the US to invest in improving intra-African trade?
Yeah, no, I think, you're right. There are quite high barriers to trade with Africa, and they're going to remain in place with the AFCFTA. But I think there is a lot of opportunities for investment. And obviously, Africa still is trading with the rest of the world. Currently, most of its trade is with the outside world, not within Africa. So it has created some new opportunities, the AFCFTA, but it still doesn't mean that it will stop trading with the rest of the world. And the US, indeed, being such a big market, for example, through AGOA, is a major export destination to Africa. So I think, there's the opportunities within Africa, but there's still the opportunities more globally as well. Perhaps the urgency has accelerated. I think, the US administration would like to repair some of the damage caused by the previous administration. So I think America has got an interest in Africa, but it's true it was not the highest of priorities, and now it's become much more of a priority. There is a geopolitical risk that the US sees in terms of losing some dominance and influence in this region.
Paul Baker, thanks so much for being with us on the show today.
Thank you very much.
After launching the drilling of several production wells in January as part of a mega oil project, Uganda expects to reduce its debt and increase economic growth by 7% from 2025.
When Uganda starts producing oil in 2025, economic growth is expected to reach 7%. This is according to the country's finance ministry. The entry into production of oil fields would also allow public debt to enter a downtrend. Last January, Uganda inaugurated a controversial drilling program in the Kingfisher oil field. According to estimates, the Lake Albert region contains an estimated quantity of crude oil of 6.5 billion barrels, of which approximately 1.4 billion are considered recoverable. For Ugandan economist Julius Mukunda, the government's forecast could impact the country's massive debt.
Our argument has been that as of now, we should not be planning and budgeting based on oil prospects, because we shifted the oil drilling debt 3 or 4 times, and we are not very sure that 2025 the oil will come. Because of that prospect, we've borrowed so much, depending that we are going to get oil out.
President Yoweri Museveni described the project operated by the Chinese company Sinopec as a major economic source. Uganda's oil reserves could last between 25 and 30 years, with peak production estimated at 230,000 barrels per day.
French-speaking sub-Saharan Africa remains the engine of African growth for the 9th consecutive year. That's according to an IMF report which shows it posted an annual growth rate of 4.4% compared to 2.9% for non-French-speaking countries in the region.
French-speaking sub-Saharan Africa overall achieved the best economic performance on the continent in 2022 for the 9th consecutive year. In its latest report, the World Bank shows that the French-speaking bloc recorded an overall growth rate of 4.4%, while the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, which is mainly English-speaking, recorded a rate of 2.9%. Nigeria and South Africa, 2 major producers of raw materials, have respectively experienced an annual growth of 2.3% and 0.9% in 2022. Although Nigeria is among top oil producers on the continent, the country is suffering from a continuous decline in oil production and hasn't succeeded in diversifying its economy. Nigeria's exports are over 90% dependent on hydrocarbons. South Africa's economy is suffering from the decline in a key sector, its mining activity, in addition to the collapse of the electricity production capacity. In West Africa, the WAMU bloc established itself as the continent's largest high-growth zone. It has recorded an annual growth averaging 5.6% between 2013 and 2022. As for that, only 2 Francophone countries were among the 10 sub-Saharan countries with the highest debt-to-GDP ratio at the end of 2022. Overall, public debt in French-speaking sub-Saharan Africa was estimated by the IMF at 49.7% of GDP at the end of 2022, compared to 60.6% for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Business Africa. Continuous news on Africanews.com and all our digital platforms.